I want to welcome everybody here tonight. Can we hear all right? All right. Doesn't sound like it's getting out.
Doesn't sound like
It's not.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I want to welcome everybody here tonight for this regular scheduled board meeting. To ask everybody to silence their electronic devices. Either put them on vibration or turn them off, please. If we will, let's ask Miss Sarah. She'll do the invocation and the pledge.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come together as citizens of Walton County. We thank you that we live in one of the most beautiful places, not only in Florida, in the United States, but in the world. We ask your guidance on everything that we do and say here tonight that will be in the best interest of the people that we serve and all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have recently got a new program to work with concerning the agendas and corresponding documents. So we're going to try and work that a little bit tonight. Hopefully we can get away from the paper. But bear with us if we get a little sidetracked or out of the way on it. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're pleased to announce tonight that we have no changes to the agenda.
Okay. We have the approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carries.
One thing on the consent agenda, I would like to thank Lewis for saving us money by renegotiating our contract on the Granica service. Thank you.
Thank you, Lewis. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First item on the agenda from admin is from Public Works. We had a request from the Homeowners Association out at 10 Lakes Estates to review changing the speed limits from 15 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour throughout that subdivision. Public Works did their research and conferred with the SO and other appropriate authorities and determined that a 25 mile per hour speed limit would be appropriate. So we're asking the board to consider that. Our recommendation is to make that change.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Thank you. The next item is from the Planning Department. It's a request for permission to move language amending Resolution 2013-09 regarding the civil citation fee schedule to the Planning Commission and hold the first public hearing to amend the Land Development Code. Mr. Dice is here, but I believe the request is to make some changes that will facilitate lining language up in one document with the other, with the citations and the Land Development Code.
That is correct. We're just modifying the resolution to make sure it fits and it's in conjunction with the first resolution we passed. There was some numbering that was out of sync, and we're just synchronizing those numbers.
So this is just a cleanup of what's already there.
Okay. I did have one question on 5.07.08A, all junk, and I realize it may say it in the code, but isn't there a better word than junk?
I believe that junk is the term that's used, I believe, I'm not wrong, in the state statutes and also in the Land Development Code. So, but yeah, yes, ma'am, you're correct. We could, more of an appropriate term than junk, because some people's junk is other people's treasure, so.
Yeah, that's right. I might think it's a jewel, and so, that's just a minor thing. But junk just seems a little, I don't know, inappropriate.
Okay. What's the board's wishes?
Motion to approve.
Second.
A motion and second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Thank you, Commissioners. The next item under planning is a request for permission to move the sandwich board sign language to the Planning Commission and hold the first public hearing to amend the Land Development Code to include the language as approved. So your action tonight would allow the currently proposed language to move to the Planning Commission for consideration and a recommendation back to the board for final adoption.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
That's all we have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bagby.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. The first item we have on the agenda is a request for Attorney General opinion on the tourist development tax. There are a couple of typos in the, it should be 2014, and it should have the new chairman's signature. When we started working on this, we were under the old chairman.
The old chairman.
He's old.
The other, the previous chairman,
No,
the
you had it right
previous
the first
chairman.
time.
That's what I meant to say, yes.
Keep waking up over there.
Okay, what's the board's wishes?
Motion to move forward, motion to approve.
A motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, the second item we have on the agenda is we, after working with the TDC attorney, the county attorney, the clerk of the courts, and others, we have come to the conclusion that we are over on bed tax collectors and the current composition of the Tourist Development Council, and B, we need your guidance on how to resolve that issue.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, as Mr. Bagby's brought that to the board's attention, I would just remind the board that in the management audit, there were some recommendations regarding potential makeup of the TDC council. One of the issues being there was no assurance that one of the large bed tax collectors was represented. It may be that the board would like to look at this in a more comprehensive manner, and including the selection process and the other issues Mr. Bagby has mentioned as you move forward. And that's just a thought from admin, hadn't recalled what the was included in that management audit.
How would you implement that?
I think we'd be glad to work with Mr. Bagby on behalf of the board and see what the best process to do that would be.
Can we get that brought back to the next meeting?
Should be.
Yes, sir, we can bring that back at the next meeting, Commissioner.
Okay,
Do we need a motion for that?
Just staff direction.
Yeah.
Staff
I
direction.
think
just
we're-
staff
okay,
direction.
Okay. And we will,
On the 21st, though, and the thing, I think the meeting's on the 20th.
it is on the 28th. I'm sorry, I thought I had changed that on the submission.
It may just be showing up here.
And then the only other update, we'll bring that back to you at the next meeting. On the updates, the only update we have, the November bed tax numbers, we're down about $20,000 over previous year, which actually equates to about 5% because November's so slow. For the year, we're flat. We're up 0.01%. And, of course, we have the Hilton's undergoing renovation, the Residence Inn's undergoing renovation, some other units, but I think we're still look good for the fiscal year 2014. Subject to your questions, I will probably see you in a little bit on the other issue that involves the TDC, the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Bagby. Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Commissioners. The only item I have on the agenda tonight is a request to call a special meeting to hold an executive session on January 28th at 8:30 a.m. to discuss litigation strategy and consider settlement of the oil spill Deepwater Horizon litigation. We have met with all the attorneys that are representing the county and the TDC, privately, Mr. Jones, myself, and the chairman, and we believe it's a good time now to advise the board on where we are in terms of litigation and where we are in terms of settlement, and we'd like to schedule that executive session.
I make the motion that we do so.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the next item is a public hearing to consider an ordinance amending Chapter 4 of the Walton County Code of Ordinances to add Article 3, providing for regulation of roadside fundraising. I believe the draft of that had been presented earlier and is before you for public hearing and your consideration.
Thank you, and I hope I have all your changes in the draft that you have before you. If this is this a second?
This is the
Only,
So it
okay.
is, so it will be for adoption.
Need a motion to open public hearing.
So moved.
I'll second that. I've got a question. The fundraising thing, that applies, is it just the areas that are outside municipalities, or is it all parts of the county are covered?
It has to be outside municipalities. We can't regulate it inside these cities.
Do we know, are we coordinating with either, or are any of the three cities having some of it? Because I've noticed in the Funiac Springs, we've had people descending where 331 T-bones into 90, just descending upon you on the weekends wanting thing, and it's kind of, well, in the county you can't do that, but in the city you can.
Yes.
I have not had any discussions with the city of Defuniak Springs.
Okay.
Okay, got a motion, second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Public hearing is open. Is there any public comments?
Could I ask a question to Brian? He can just nod his head. Don't they have to get permission of the council in Defuniak? Yeah, you have to get permission from the city council in Defuniak in order to do. Supposed to, yes.
Okay. Any public comments? Seeing none? Close it.
Motion to go forward.
Yeah, second.
Got a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carries. This is another public hearing concerning,
No, we need
Well-
a motion to adopt.
To make,
oh,
It's the
okay.
adoption.
do we close the public hearing?
Yeah.
Yeah, we close the
Motion to
public hearing
adopt.
and have a motion to adopt.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, this is another public hearing. Mr. Jones, you want to read that?
Mr. Chairman, this is a public hearing to consider an ordinance amending ordinances 8618 and 9823, establishing the initial tourist development tax and the third cent tourist development tax.
Okay. This is a public hearing. Is there any public comments? Seeing none?
We didn't open the public hearing,
Yeah, we did.
did we? My vote is yes.
And, Mr. Chairman, because this involves the appropriation or expenditure of potential tax funds, you have to vote within the public hearing to adopt the resolution and then close the public hearing.
Okay. All right. What's the board's wishes?
This does not have anything to do with the airport tax, half cent, does it? Just, okay, because I want to make sure, because that needs to go.
It does.
Oh,
Oh, I thought you meant the city.
We're required by the plan, if you remember, this stems from the audit or the management study done by the ISP, that we don't have a tourist development plan. This is the tourist development plan, and it has to include all revenue that we currently have. If you decide to sunset the half cent in September, we would bring you back another tourist development plan in October of this year. But this, we're supposed to do this every 2 years and account for the revenue. This accounts for all the revenue to include the half cent airport fund.
but that will come back in September, correct? The
It will come back before September.
The airplane tax.
On the airplane, and
All right.
to get your guidance on modify the use, sunset it, or extend it. And so,
Right.
yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And this is the one that has the wrong name and the wrong date of the previous chairman.
Okay. Any questions? Is there any comments from the public? Seeing none? What's the board's
Motion to
wish?
adopt the ordinance.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Motion to close public hearing.
Got a motion to close the public hearing and also a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, Commissioner Meadows.
Well, that was quick. I do have some handouts for you. I didn't want to put them in the agenda because I kept getting them in, but I wanted to, I'll start just one by one. I want to introduce to you the concept of the tax increment financing district for a portion of or portions of South Walton to get some infrastructure completed. The first thing I'm going to hand you is I had the Public Works Department just give me some rough estimates for some of the work that needs to be done, yesterday. And one of them is the overlay and reconstruction of the entire 15 miles of County Road 30A. $6 million. I'll go ahead and pass these down to y'all. But you can see, it's on the first page, just they've come up with the following, that there's $6 million worth of, $6 million worth of overlay reconstruction work. There's $60,000 in crosswalks that need to be maintained and upgraded. And there's $3 million in drainage retrofits. As you know, 30A doesn't have, was never, accommodated with drainage, stormwater management. And that created some of the flooding we had this summer. So this is an idea about, this is $10 million. And as you know, we just don't have pots of $10 million sitting around anywhere. I did get Mark Davis to weigh in on some of the, and they have it on the TV screen, some of the issues on tax increment financing districts, and the process was set out by, I think, a law journal at one time. But anyway, the process is on page 2, and it's simplified, but it basically says that the BCC designates an area, and the BCC designates the tax year as the baseline year, say 2014 is a baseline year. Then the BCC designates whether the length of the TIF is 5 years, 10 years, whatever, how long is it going to go. They designate which projects are going to be financed with it, so it would be specific. And then we could designate whether we wanted to pay as we go or borrow the money and bond the improvements out. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then once it's done, it appears by resolution, any tax increase in the property taxes for the parcels within the TIF that are set up by the county would go to a portion of, or 100% would go back into that area to do those improvements. So that's kind of the basic idea behind a TIF. Okaloosa County has done one to get, I think, the 4-lane, what was it, the extension of the 85?
They were looking at that.
They were looking at that.
I'm not sure they've implemented it.
Okay, and here's some of the information that they gave. They had the Haas Institute look at some projections on revenues for certain districts. So that is something that you can do. You can have the revenues projected. You can kind of see what will come out of that particular district over that course of time. Neighbors Giblin has also, they sent Gary Demers a kind of a synopsis of tax increment financing for the 331 district. Now, you probably already have a copy of this, but this is their overview of tax increment financing, and you can take a look at that at some point. But what I wanted to do tonight was just to kind of introduce this, the idea, maybe get your approval to work with the county administrator and the county attorney, look into it further, whether we would need to get the government services group to come up with some of the numbers, or whether we could do it in-house, and just proceed down the line. I'm not asking you to vote for anything tonight. Just proceed down the line and come up with some numbers and what the district would look like, what we could pay for with it over the course of time, and then bring it back at some point, I don't know when that would be, to look at the numbers, look at all the details, and then maybe make some decisions.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's an excellent idea to have Neighbors Giblin get involved in this, or the Government Services Group, I guess, is the one that probably would be doing the review. Well, one of the concerns that I would have and that we would want them to address is the fact that over the past 3 years, most TIF financing has been shelved because of the property value. After the oil spill and then with the housing industry bubble being burst, TIF financing didn't provide the necessary revenue to cover the costs. So I think if we could get an assessment by them, as they've done many of the MSBUs, they probably would have available the information of exactly what you're looking for.
Okay.
Which parcels,
Yeah.
how much would be generated, what their estimates are, and what the available financing sources might be that we could pursue for it. So I think if we put it in to a hands of a group that's familiar with doing this kind of stuff, I think we'd be well served at looking at it from that standpoint.
Yeah, that would be good. And one thing too about this particular area of the county is unique because it is growing again, and these housing values, I would say that they're probably almost 90% to what they were back in the boom. And people in real estate can correct me on that. But we have a lot, there's a lot going on, and we have an opportunity now to kind of capture that rise in these property taxes over, I think, the next couple of years. So, because the prices did drop, and now they are going back up. So, I was looking at the Seaside sales, and nothing in Seaside is listed for, I think, under 1.5 million at this time. So, and back in the day when the recession hit, you could actually buy something in there for $750, $800. So, you can kind of see, that's just one example. But I agree that we definitely need some expertise on this because it is a complex financial decision.
Okay.
I would make a motion that we contract with Government Services Group to embark on a study to see what the issues are, what we can do, what the proposals would be, the options would be to pursue something like this, or even perhaps some alternative ideas that they might come up with. But let's get a group that does this for a living to give us some guidance.
Can we do that, or do we have to put out an RFP?
Yeah, I was going to suggest, unless we know for sure it's going to be less than that bid amount, we'd have to actually put it out for an RFP.
But I think we should move forward and do that.
Okay.
I thought we had a continuing services agreement with them.
I don't know if we have one with them or not. Do we? If we have a continuing services agreement, then obviously we don't.
With GSG, yeah.
GSG,
Yeah,
government.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
And I guess we'd have to give them the specific details of what we wanted them to come up
Yeah,
with.
and I think that's going to be an important component.
Yeah.
We may want to
Let's get that information from
get Camille Tharp or some of those from GSG over to talk perhaps individually about exactly what we're looking for and what we're asking them to do. I mean, I think generally we understand, but they may need to know more specific whether it's going to be
How big
everything
it's
South
going to
Walton,
be.
what, how many districts we're looking at. So why don't we get with Camille or Robert Sheets or some of them from GSG and see if they can set up a time to come over, and we'll schedule times with each of you, and we'll sit down and have some conversation.
Okay.
And we can get a better idea of where to go with it. So,
Good idea.
Withdrawing the
Okay.
motion, I
We
see.
need a,
Mr. Hudson, come forward, state your name for the record, please.
do we need a motion and a second, or we just direct
I
staff?
think he already made a motion.
He made it, and I would let it.
We just direct.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Bob Hudson. I'm a resident of Santa Rosa Ridge. I stand before you tonight as a private citizen, and I want to make sure everybody understands exactly what that means. I also at times stand before you representing Walton County taxpayers, and I'm not doing that tonight. I'm representing myself. Based on when Larry and whoever, Larry, it may not have been you, but I think it was you that initially proposed a TIF on 331. I was unfamiliar with TIFs, and so I began to do a lot of research on TIFs and have done that. And some of you may fall over in your chairs at this point in time, but I am of the opinion that this part of the county has tremendous infrastructure needs. And to meet those infrastructure needs through an ad valorem tax rate increase would be highly controversial. I think that Commissioner Meadows did a great job of giving an overview of what a TIF is. Let's say today you go out and declare today is the day that we're going to freeze the values, and let's say my home is worth $400,000. A year from now, when an appraisal is done or revaluations is done, if that's $500,000, then the millage rate would apply to the entire $500,000, but of $100,000 of that would go into a special account. I'm particularly interested in when Commissioner Meadows mentioned a portion of that going into a frozen account, because when you look at where the tax revenue or the ad valorem revenue comes from, a great deal of it does come from the South, and to freeze, in effect, over a 10-year, 20-year period of time countywide, would have a big impact to meet your growth in your regular general revenue. Your general fund would be a real challenge. So, Commissioner Meadows, I applaud you for the work you've done, and I really think the county should move forward. I read the Haas report that was done over in Okaloosa County. I've talked to those people, and I've talked throughout South Florida. There are a lot of TIFs that are in the southern part of the state, I've talked to Texas, I've talked to a lot of different people about the program. And it is a way that we can capture some of those dollars in growth and property value, Cindy, at this point in time. You know, my only concern is when you say, well, we're going to go out, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. We have an opportunity to capture money this year. There's not only property values increase. Commissioner Meadows, I don't believe they're back to 90%. Some of them may be, but there is growth that's occurring and a lot of new developments that are occurring, and so you're going to have a growth that would occur here. So I encourage you to do that, and I applaud you for taking a look at it, and hopefully all of you will support that. I'm going to talk to the Taxpayers Association and see if we can come for you and say we support that method of trying to fund the infrastructure needs that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson.
Commissioner Meadows, do you have any idea how long it would take us to accomplish this? I mean, does anybody know? Are we talking
Well,
6 months?
if Mark Davis would work all night every week,
I don't know.
you know, we could probably get it done in a month. But,
Yeah.
no, I'm thinking 90 days would be reasonable, I think. I mean, 90 days to have something where we're actually looking at some numbers and looking at, what do you think, 90 days?
I think it would be pretty preliminary at 90, but I think we can have an idea of
Yeah.
what the next step would look
Yeah.
like and where we need to go.
And I'd like to see some detailed numbers on the cost. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
nice round number to deal with right now, but certainly if we give some guidance to Public Works to come back with some detail out what the cost would be for doing different things at different places.
Yeah, and also too, one of the things that's going to happen in the next couple of years when 331 is completed and that corridor opens up 4-lane, you're going to have some tax revenue that's going to really go, you know, it's really going to contribute to the coffers. So I think the timing is right.
Well, I guess one question I'd have in regards to the 331 corridor and the TIF that we're looking at there, would we have to create another TIF zone? Is that basically what we're talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
and there's no prohibition against creating 1 or 50.
In South Walton, you would probably look at multiple ones,
Yeah.
because the revenue that you generate pretty much has to be specified for a particular project.
Okay, very well.
Well,
Yeah.
not only do we need it here in South Walton, but if we're going to develop that corridor so that we can, you know, then we've got to get water and sewer there.
Correct.
And how are we going to pay for that?
Right.
You know,
and
this may be a
will-
mechanism to do that as well. How are
Yeah.
we going to pay for the water and sewer? It's needed to open up that corridor so businesses will come and we can get the tax revenue.
Well, if we have, you can have multiples.
Yes.
When you set the calendar year or the ad valorem year for one, does that make it the same forever? So it depends on when it's implemented as to when you set it.
That's correct.
Each zone would have its calendar year. That's
Yeah.
Very well.
And
And it's
within those
percentage.
zones, you can determine whether you want 100% of the increment increase, or 50, or 40, or 12, whatever. the
Whatever,
number may
yeah.
be.
All right, so what we want to do as far as Ms. Meadows is just,
We're going to get Camille Tharp to come over, and
Okay.
either she or Robert Sheets, someone from Government Services Group,
Okay.
to do us a briefing. We'll talk with Camille if she thinks a gathering workshop type situation would be
Yeah, if
good.
we could,
We
yeah,
could do that and then have some time individually with her.
okay.
So
Yeah.
we'll make that.
I'd like to kind of get to the point where we can make a decision, though, probably, you know, in 90 days. I think that's possible.
Well, I think it's possible to decide that that's the path we want to go down. I don't think we'll be ready
To actually
to move down the
institute it.
path, but at
Okay.
least we'll know we'll be ready to put the pieces in place. Would you think that'd be
Okay.
useful?
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Anything else, Ms. Meadows?
No, I think that's all I had.
Okay. Ms. Commissioner Commander?
I don't have a thing today.
Commissioner Enfield? Commissioner Pridgen?
Nothing.
Chapman? No. Next up is South Lake Drive neighborhood. Huh? See, hang on a minute. Where's he at?
He's hiding there. There he is.
There he is. Billy, can you come up, please?
He is standing up. He is standing up.
There, you need to get seen. Tell him,
He was out on the
tell him get a better shot. Did you comment on that too?
Okay. If you will, state your name for the record and keep your comments within the 5-minute time limit, please.
I am going to really try. I didn't know I had 5 minutes. I'm Lynn Stafford, and I am just a neighbor that lives off South Lake Drive. And I want you all to know that how many neighbors here are within 300 feet of this particular. Please raise your hand. It's a very sparsely populated neighborhood that was platted in 1939, and the plat was platted right over the wetlands. South Lake Drive itself was just a tiny little narrow road. It is now maintained by the county. And we're already gone to the second slide, okay. That's okay, you can go. What you're seeing is looking south on South Lake Drive, which is on the left, and on the right is the mosquito control ditch. And this is your controls trying to contain the construction that is going on the north side of that retainer pipe, or whatever it's called. Mr. Smith has 2 lots there. Mr. Smith was permitted by the county, by the DEP, by the Corps of Engineers. I have no problem there. I think he's tried to do what he was supposed to do. But what has happened is that there are a number of issues that have come up. The very first one, after we called the DEP, that has us all concerned is that Eastern Lake is a coastal dune lake, and it's one of the few that still opens and closes to the Gulf, and it is not protected. And we were stunned to find that out. So when this permit was issued, it was not treated any differently from any other lake.
Add one thing is that the county has not issued any permits for this site. They have no county permits.
Okay, well, I may say some things that I don't know about.
It's DEP permitted the wetland removal, and this is part of the, go ahead. I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay. All right, let's go to slide 1, which is the history. There was a study done in 1996 of Eastern Lake. There was a biological assessment, a bird assessment, a chemical assessment, et cetera, and among those things, Bill Brosco and Jack Rutland did a hand-drawn diagram of the springs that feed the lake. The lake is not fed by any moving water. It is not fed by Peach Creek. And one of those springs feeds into here. Eastern Lake, the wetlands that you see that are impacted were part of Eastern Lake. They were the buffer for Eastern Lake at that time. This plat was, as I say, done in 1939. The Rutlands at that point could take their boat out to the lake from South Gulf Drive. And I'll show you all a diagram in a minute, and you'll be able to see that. The baseline study was given to Northwest Florida State College, and it has disappeared. Nobody seems to be able to find it. But anyway, that's beside the point. We have a bunch of questions. I think I have more questions than I have concerns. The first was that there was supposed to be a coastal dune lake management plan, that the Coastal Dune Lake Advisory Board was supposed to have some authority over, and that has not, I don't know what's happened to that. That's the first question. We don't know where it is, what it says, what's protected, and who protects it. This wetlands that you see, the top of the line is 30A. South Lake Drive goes right down there, and where it diagonally goes, Center Avenue bisects where it goes diagonally. It goes directly into the lake through a culvert. And that parcel down at the bottom is where the original South Lake Drive was supposed to be. It was platted directly in the wetland runoff. There is no South Lake Drive south of Center Avenue. What you see now is a mosquito control ditch. When they dug the mosquito control ditch, it threw some dirt up on the existing road. The controls that you saw in that first slide were designed to protect the mosquito control ditch as well as everything else. Before the construction began, you could see larvae, you could see fish larvae eating fish floating around in the mosquito control ditch, and you could see clearly to the bottom. The larvae eating fish are dead. The mosquito larvae are thriving, and mosquito control was called out, and they injected, as I understand it, a bunch of chemicals into the water, which goes directly into the lake. If I'm wrong, you all can correct me later, but this is all my understanding, and I may be wrong. The permit that was issued, whether it was DEP or whatever, originally, the one that I saw was 18 pages. My understanding is now there's a new one out there that's 50 pages, which we have not read.
Ms. Stafford, I don't mean to cut you off, but the time limit's up, and all these documents that you are flashing up here now, we have had, and we've had the opportunity to read. I would like to give Mr. McKee the opportunity to speak to the issues that was presented to us in your presentation and whatever he may have found out to answer any of your questions.
Okay.
Can they just put a picture up, though, of the lot with the retaining wall in the county right away, and the idea that red sand had to be, no, keep going, that red sand, this is in my district too, and I went out there and looked at all this. Next, that's some clearing the lot, that's next.
Now, this one is the one I really want you to see.
Okay,
if we may go back up one.
Back up to
This shows the lots that are not yet developed, that are in the wetlands. And we've got a dozen of them, approximately, that will be developed along these same lines.
I thought you had a picture of the retaining wall they built in the county right away.
We do, it's in there, but I don't know what all's in here. I did not do the slide projection.
Okay. And they also were hauling in red clay. And
But that has been replaced.
But we had to send the guys out, and they had to put a stop work order on these guys, and the red clay had to be removed.
That's a retaining wall.
And now we still have a retaining wall.
Still have a retaining wall in the right of way, and this is the picture that, back up one picture. No, I'm sorry, go forward one picture. No? Where is it? Back up one again. There, stop. See back up. Back up again. There on the right, you see the little stub with the yellow? That is the right-of-way marker. And it's still there, and the development is into the right-of-way. The property to the top right is the neighbor's property, and there's water intrusion going into their property. So, it seems common sense that you would try to avoid pushing water into other people's properties, but that's happening. And it's going to happen even worse with the lots that are not yet impacted that are coming up. So,
Mr. McKee?
Commissioners, I'm Billy McKee with the Public Works Department. We received the agenda form that was submitted, and there were some statements or questions on there that we basically went through that. One of them I want to address real quick is there were some concerns about a septic system that might be have been damaged by the construction that took place. Health Department came out and evaluated that, and they determined that system is okay. The muck, when it's demucked, it smells. It's got a sulfide odor to it, so it does smell like that. That's pretty common. One thing that I will agree with, maybe with everything Ms. Stafford said, these lots were platted over wetlands years ago, and they're all over the place. And this is going to be a continuing problem, depending upon how you look at it. So they are platted over the wetlands. These folks did obtain their appropriate permits from the jurisdictional agencies to fill those wetlands. And there's some pretty incriminating looking photos, of some equipment out in the muck and the mud. That's what happens when you fill a wetland. It goes away. And no consideration, apparently, no hydrologic consideration was given to, the inputs into the coastal dune lake. That's something that the agencies really don't, they don't really make any differentiation about a coastal dune lake versus any other water body unless it's a outstanding Florida water, and then they have some, some additional criteria, but they're not that extensive.
Mr. McKee?
Yes, sir.
In regards to these being the platted lots that have probably been there since who knows when, 30s, 40s maybe. I mean, how do you straighten out something like that? We can't very well take a person's property away because it's the regulations change over here, and you can't, I don't think, counsel, that we can.
Well, if I could, I have been researching this, and I've talked to Mark Davis about this extensively. What we found out was, when I asked the question, how could this all happen without any county knowledge? Because we didn't know what was going on. The neighbors called us. We went out there, and how could we know this? And Billy, said, well, all they need is a DEP permit to clear the wetlands. And so I talked to some other people that reviewed permits, and they said, yeah, we don't look at lots of record. I said, well, this is within 300 feet of a coastal dune lake. We don't look at lots of record in that zone. And I said, well, where's that in the code? So I had Mark Davis render some opinions on the code and the application of these lots of record. Now, he says you can't stop people from building anything in them, but they do have to follow the Coastal Dune Lake Protection Zone criteria that we've established in the Land Development Code, and they also have to follow the other county codes. I mean, we can't just say just because they were platted and lots of record is that we don't have any jurisdiction over them.
That's correct. The one caveat is you can't apply the Land Development Code or the Coastal Dune Lake criteria to the point where it would take their property. In other words, if there's 9 criteria that we can apply, that they can still use their property for a single-family home. We can apply 8 of them without preventing them from building their house. We can do that. If the 9th one prevents them from building their house, we could not apply that 9th one.
But one of the criteria says no retaining walls within 300 feet of a coastal dune lake. So then we got into it, and this became a much bigger issue in the fact that, and I spoke with the county administrator, and we're working on coming up with a process that says, and then I asked them, they said, well, there's no clearing permit anymore. We did away with the clearing permit. So we would never know if somebody was out, whatever they're doing, and that's why we're getting calls on Friday afternoons from people all over the district saying somebody's out building a retaining wall and clearing wetlands. And so we need to come up with a situation, with a process where Walton County either reinstates the clearing permit or some format where this doesn't keep happening again. Granted, they can get their DEP permits and such, but this is the kind of thing that we're dealing with on a Friday afternoon when there's no code enforcement working and and over the holidays. And so one of the things that we've looked at with the administrator is a process so that these don't slip through the cracks, that if you have a lot, GIS has platted out every lot of record that is within 300 feet of a coastal dune lake. GIS has all the layers. There's really no excuse for somebody in permitting to say, well, I didn't know. Or, well, we just don't look at them.
Did they come to us for permitting?
No, they don't need to right now, according to what I have discovered. So I think, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we certainly recognize that there are issues associated with what's going on here. And the idea is not to deal with them through code enforcement action, but to get ahead of it. And the discussion I had with Commissioner Meadows and some with planning staff and Mr. Davis is perhaps looking at reinstating clearing permits in some environmentally sensitive areas, probably beginning with the coastal dune lake protection zones. And as Mr. Davis said, we're perhaps limited on how many of the criteria we can enforce, but at least we will know which ones those are and why we're not enforcing the other ones. If we do indeed implement a policy that says if you're lot, even if it's a lot of record encroaches into that 300-foot zone, we're asking you to come get a clearing permit so that we know exactly what's going on from that point on. And we're not getting calls, Friday afternoon, weekend says, they got a retaining wall stuck out in the county right of way.
Do we know why they did away with the clearing permit?
I don't think they were ever codified in our code. I think it was a policy that began and kind of rocked and rolled, and as things either got way too busy or not busy enough, it kind of, we missed one here, we missed one there. I think that what we'd want to do is make sure we get it.
Oh, may I say something when you finish? I don't mean to interrupt.
Go right ahead.
I think each one of these issues is handled by a different agency, a different department in the county. There needs to be somebody with some oversight. So this won't happen to the lake, it won't happen to the neighbors, it won't happen to the commissioners, and it won't happen to the poor guy trying to build his house. So it needs to have a plan. And we need to know who to go to. We need to know whether the neighbors have any say-so or should be watching. It's a big thing, and I hope you all will give it some oversight and look at the future of what's about to happen.
Yeah, I would like to see maybe Administrator Jones come back with, an outline of how the county process, how this is going to be processed through the county, and who's going to be responsible for what, and get the different departments and agencies talking.
We've always had trouble with people sneaking in on Fridays and Saturdays when, how do we address that in the code? I mean, we just can't say blanket, you can't clear your property on Saturday and Sunday, but maybe within a coastal zone or something.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we've talked about. And we'll be glad to work with Wayne and planning staff and legal.
You can clear in Paxton, but not.
Got to have code. We're going to have a system where code enforcement is available on Friday afternoons or Saturday afternoons, and if something like this comes up, that somebody's on call, I think.
May I turn the floor over to Scott Jell, whose property adjoins this?
I'll be very brief. My name is Scott Jell. I own 72 South Lake Drive. It's the lot adjacent to the two that have been cleared to the north side. And since this development has started, obviously filling a lot of wetlands, you have to displace water. A lot of that water has been displaced onto my property line. When this was a wetland, it was somewhat wet when we got a lot of rain on the edge of our driveway. It would pool a little bit. Now it's pooled at all times. And when we get rain for more than a day in a row, it's pooling almost approaching the edge of our driveway. I'm really concerned, from a personal matter, in addition to all of the concerns about the lake and the ecosystem. That if we get the sort of rain that we got this year in the early summer, where it seemed like months on end, it just didn't stop raining, that our driveway is going to be submerged. And what we can do retroactively. I mean, I agree that it would be great to put some guidelines in place for not having this happen again for future development, but I'm kind of left with this problem now where we're underwater, so to speak, and we'd like to see if maybe the developer who's working on this lot could be enforced in some way to provide proper drainage. Billy's been out a couple times. He knows a lot about this. So.
Let me add that there's one other gentleman in the room whose property will be directly affected. He's at the very bottom of this wetland. And it's Dick Armstrong, and he can't stand up.
I see.
Dick right there.
Billy, go ahead.
We are working with the property owner and his contractor. We haven't gotten a plan back from them yet, but we're asked them to do a plan to pull back their retaining walls for the driveway as far back off the right-of-way as they could get it. It will still be on the right-of-way somewhat because of the ditch and the size of the ditch. And Mr. Jill he does have an issue. They have kind of cut off the flow through there, so we're asking the property owner to reconnect that by installing a culvert on that side of the lot, hopefully to pop off any kind of water that might discharge over there or displace. So we haven't gotten that back yet, but that is in the works once they get the bugs worked out of their operation. So that's something we've asked them to do.
Okay, Mr. Hudson, do you have something?
For the record, my name is Bob Hudson, and this hat I'm wearing is with South Walton Mosquito Control, because the ditch that you're talking about is a ditch that we dug and we maintain. Those ditches were dug in 1988, 1987. Permits were acquired from the DEP, State Department of Environmental Protection, and letters from the adjacent property owners were received giving us permission to dig that ditch. Let me say that I'd never heard of lot of record not having to go through the normal process, but I just want everybody to understand what normally happens is we would receive from the planning department when anything was proposed that would touch one of our ditches. And we have an opportunity then to express a viewpoint on the impact that whatever was being proposed would have on that ditch. In this case, the only way we knew anything was going on out there was when we received a call and we dispatched. We've sent people out there 5 times now. And we were told and were shown proper permits to do what they were doing. And so there seems to be some consternation. Well, we don't have any authority to do anything if they have proper permits. So hopefully, I just wanted everybody, it says Walton County Mosquito Ditch. It's the South Walton County Mosquito Control Ditch. It's us, and she's been calling the right people. That's just a name difference and everything, but hopefully we can find a way, because as Commissioner Meadows talked, and one of the reasons I'm interested in a TIP is because of drainage and things of that nature, and this project will impact that mosquito ditch. We already know it has that. She said we put chemicals. We used a product called BTI that was put in that ditch, which is not a carcinogenic type of chemical. It's a naturally occurring thing in the ground, because we can't put fish in there at this point in time. So we're going to work with them through this process as well. Wanted you to know.
Billy, do you think a lot of this, and I certainly want to move forward and let's start getting some rules and regulations for in the future, but addressing this issue, do you think a lot of this may be solved once the guy's through out there? I mean,
that'll go a long way to it, but there does need to be a process, and I don't know what we want to call it, whether it's a clearing permit or a pre-construction notification for new development. When you're platting something new, this probably, they couldn't even build there, most likely. So this is a little bit different, so we do need a process that the county is aware, and through a regular process at the TRC level, the mosquito control folks, they have a chance to be involved, and so does everybody else. So this one is just a different animal, and we do need to get a grip on it, because we have them all the time. I can think of some others right now that we're working with, similar situation, just not necessarily on this lake. So,
Okay.
One last thing that you might put into your thinking. The original permit that we saw was actually issued to the prior owner in 2006, and it was permitted. I don't know whether it was grandfathered or what, but that was originally permitted. And in that permit, it shows a conservation easement. I can't figure out where the conservation easement is, but it had a diagram, and it's in your
that is
packet.
in the Devil Swamp up towards Bunker.
Oh, it's not this?
No, ma'am. That's
Well,
where
it's in the permit.
Well, it is in the permit, but that's where that
Well, that explains why I couldn't find it. Okay. Well, that's good. And the last thing is that I know that the state of Florida is trying to restore because of the watershed, trying to restore the movement of water between water bodies. And this is a typical sort of thing that is not happening. And that we no longer have flounder, redfish, mullet, crabs, all these fish that I have caught, black bass, of course crappie and those things. All those are gone in Eastern Lake. It was a fish hatchery at one point.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Stafford.
do we need to direct staff, please, to move forward?
Staff's been directed. I think they understand that.
Okay, thank
We
you.
work.
Okay.
Come back to us with the plan.
Sure.
Okay. Is there any additional public comments? Come forward, state your name, please.
My name is Rebecca Swift. and my property is adjacent to that. And I have here, it says this property contains a conservation easement. And you're telling me it doesn't? Billy?
Billy,
He's right there.
can't leave yet.
Could you explain what that is?
There is a conservation easement that has been recorded with the state of Florida, and that shows it. It's actually over in the Devil's Swamp, which is up towards Bunker. That's just telling you that for the impact of that wetland, they compensated for it by buying and putting into conservation some property up in a wetland bank in the Devil's Swamp mitigation area.
Well, why does this say this area is under Walton County mosquito control, and right underneath that it says this property contains a conservation easement?
There is one for the impact to that property, but we can't find a conservation easement associated with the property that prohibits anything.
Okay, well, there are also 2 septic tanks. Septic. I have one, and Judge McAlilly has one, and they both are right at the edge of these properties.
Okay.
You did have the health department come out and evaluate.
Yes, I've got, and I had the mosquito control, they came out and they said they found larvae in the construction site because the fish were unable to, live.
Ma'am, direct your comments to the board, please.
I'm sorry. I did have the mosquito control come out, and they said they found larvae in the construction area because they're not able to have the fish that they normally have in there eating that. And also, it's a skim on the top of the water. You cannot see through the water anymore. And it's a really bad situation. And I did go look at the extra pages. There were not very many, and I went over there today to check their permits, and about 50 pages are added. And they do not say the same thing as the first things that were in there.
Billy.
Something new in the box, is that what you're?
I'm telling you, there are about 40 new pages in the box, and they were not there.
Are they, so we need to check with DEP and ask them if they've added to that permit.
So we can get copies of it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Any additional public comments? Okay. Recap for staff. Any questions?
Any questions? You're clear. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to stand in recess till 5:05.
Chapman may be doing it.
Let's come to order, please.
Chapman may be doing it. He's on there.
Mr. Dines?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have several items on the agenda. We do have one request to continue. That is number 2 under the quasi-judicial items. John Minger, small-scale amendment 13-018. He has asked that that be continued until the February 11th, 2014 meeting here at 5 o'clock.
Motion to,
Motion to continue, also, if you would, also give us permission to advertise the ordinance change. This is a small scale amendment.
all right.
In the same motion.
Motion to move it to February the 11th and to advertise the small scale amendment change.
A motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us down to number 1 on our agenda under legislative items. It is the existing roadway functional classification map, large-scale amendment. I'll ask Mr. Carpenter to come forward and give you a brief presentation on this item.
Need to give Mr. Carpenter a break. I understand City Council and the Funiac went till, what, 10 o'clock last night?
No rest for the weary. I'm Matt Carpenter for Walton County Planning Department. Commissioners, this is a transmittal hearing for a large-scale amendment proposing to amend the existing roadway functional classification map in the Walton County Comprehensive Plan map series. And the purpose of this amendment is to address changed conditions and to recognize the increased functional classification of 4 segments of roadways in South Walton. Specifically, those roadways include a revised designation of West Hewitt Road between Driscoll Drive and U.S. Highway 98, East Hewitt Road between Talon Way and U.S. 98, Churchill Bayou Road between Church Street and County Road 393. Those are being revised from a classification of other roadways to minor collector. And the 4th segment is County Road 393 between Chat Holly Road and US 98. That would be going from minor collector to major collector. And just to give you an idea of the criteria we used in our source documents, is based on the latest guidance document from the Federal Highway Administration titled Highway Functional Classification Concepts, Criteria, and Procedures, 2013 edition, the current Walton County Land Development Code, and the current Walton County Comprehensive Plan. These documents provide the following definitions for collector roadways. From the FWA, it serves a critical role in the roadway network by gathering traffic from local roads and funneling them to the arterial network. From the Land Development Code, Section 5.0402B2 provides access to non-residential uses and connects lower-order streets to arterial streets. Design speeds and average daily traffic volumes will be higher than for lower-order streets. Collector roads shall be designated to have a minimum posted speed of less than 30 miles per hour. From our LDC definitions, page 3, these are roads intended to connect residential streets to the highway's system's major arterial roads. These roads are county maintained and include both paved and unpaved. And from the comprehensive plan, a roadway providing service which is of relatively moderate traffic volume, moderate trip length, and moderate operating speeds. Collector roads collect and distribute traffic between local roads and arterial roads, and these roadways are designated on the Walton County roadway classification map. In addition to those source documents, each of these roadway segments was analyzed by our Public Works Division, both on condition and size, markings and speed limit. And we also did an analysis, which you can find on page 10 of 12, of land use implications of the existing functional classification map amendments before you tonight. By and large, these classifications don't make a significant impact as far as potential changes that would be allowed through small-scale or large-scale amendments to the future land use map. Again, this particular proposal was heard on November 14th, 2013 at the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission recommended approval to this body. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
And again, this is a transmittal hearing. We will be sending this amendment to DEO, and then it will come back after their review in 30 days for an adoption hearing.
Okay, what's the board's wishes?
Motion to transmit it to.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, next on our agenda is number 3. And this is a judicial meetings, hearing, so I'm sure I guess we have to be sworn in.
Anyone anticipate speaking to the board regarding any of the items of the quasi-judicial agenda, please raise your stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give before this board will be the truth?
I do.
Has any commissioner had any communication from anyone regarding any of these items on the quasi-judicial agenda?
No.
Does anyone have any objections to the particular? Anyone have any objections to the notice as provided for any of the quasi-judicial hearings? Hearing none, it's all yours, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. The first, number 3 on our agenda is the O'Donnell Medical Facility. Brian Underwood from our staff is the staff person for this, and I'll ask him to come forward and give a brief presentation on this item.
Good evening, Brian Underwood, Planning and Development Services. This is a major development order application submitted by Jenkins Engineering Incorporated requesting approval to construct a 16,086 square foot commercial building, 3 stories, for uses including medical office, general office, and retail space. The project includes 1.08 acres with a future land use of village mixed use. The project is located on the south side of U.S. Highway 98, approximately 1 mile west of the intersection of County Road 30A and U.S. Highway 98. There are no known code violations on the subject property, and unless other evidence is presented to the contrary, the project will be consistent with the Walton County Comprehensive Plan and Land Development Code when the comments and conditions stated below are met. Those conditions include all required permits must be obtained prior to initiation of construction, and a final on-site inspection of the project shall be conducted by South Walton Fire District prior to final approval. We do have Jamie Eubanks and Steve Piazza here representing the applicant, and my recommendation is a motion to approve O'Donnell Medical Facility subject to all comments and conditions being satisfied.
Thank you. Does the applicant wish to speak?
I'm happy to answer.
Any questions from the board?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Public comments?
Mr. Chairman, we have public comments.
Public comments.
We need to have any request for public comment.
Is there any public comments concerning this application? Seeing none?
Motion to approve.
With the comments and
With
conditions?
comments and conditions from the planning
Okay.
commission.
Okay, got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us to the last item on our agenda, number 4, the Oxford Point E2 change. I ask Mr. Greg Stewart on behalf of Walton County Planning to give a brief presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Greg Stewart, law firm of Neighbors, Giblin, Nickerson, representing planning staff. Before you is an application filed by the developer of Sandestin DRI seeking to correct a notice of proposed change that was adopted in 1989. The basis of this is that the amount of acreage assigned to parcel 224 back then incorrectly designated it as only 10.8 acres, when in fact it was 15.8 acres. This is brought under the provisions of Section 380.06 under an E2 change. And an E2 change is a minor change that is not deemed to be significant. And as required by law, any proposed E2 change has to go to the Department of Economic Opportunity for them to determine whether it is an E2 change. They have in fact indicated that. The proposed change would be an adoption of an ordinance that would amend the development order to reflect that parcel 224 is 15.8 acres, not 10.8 acres. Staff has looked at that. We have looked at the information, and it is our recommendation that it be approved. This is not a development approval in the sense that it authorizes any development. This is a cleanup provision, and the Technical Review Committee required this prior to going forward with any type of development on that parcel. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Dice, or Mr. Chairman.
Before any deliberations go on, I have a conflict on this, so I'm going to be recused from this.
Thank you.
Commissioners, I am going to make an announcement here about what I'm going to ask you to do at this point. This is a ordinance change, and we are required under Section 125 to advertise ordinances in a particular way. Frankly, that's not been done, and we have not done it since I've been here. We're going to start, and I don't want to prejudice either party, but we need to have this. What I'm going to request is have you give staff permission to advertise this as an ordinance as required by Chapter 125. It's a 10-day notice, and then set the adoption of the ordinance for January 28th of the next board meeting. That way, we will have complied with Chapter 125 and adopting the ordinance to go forward. In the meantime, I'm going to also ask the board to schedule, if we can do it before or around the time of the 28th, something called a compliance hearing, essentially. I did that again, didn't I? I'm sorry. That compliance hearing, we're going to have to make a determination at some point, and we need to do it now, frankly, or as soon as possible, whether or not Sandestin is or is not in substantial compliance with its DRI, because that is an issue that's been raised. Staff's been dealing with it for a year, 2 years. Mr. Becknell's been dealing with it for a year. At some point, we need to make that formal determination after taking the necessary, or having a necessary hearing. So only thing we're asking you to do tonight on number 2 is to simply give the staff permission to advertise the E2 change as an ordinance adoption and schedule the adoption hearing for the 28th.
Do you need a motion now?
We will need a motion, yes.
All right.
And let me say this, the asking to advertise part is actually your policy. It's not part of the statute. The statute doesn't require the board to give staff permission to advertise, but you have a policy regarding ordinance adoption that does require that. So we're asking you to do that.
Okay. So moved.
A motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
So when will it come back to us on the 28th?
We'll have it advertised and for you on the 28th. That is correct. And then either in the meantime or around that same time, we're going to have that compliance hearing. We're going to set it for a day certain because, frankly, Mr. Becknell and his attorney have a pile of information to give you. The Homeowners Association, I'm sure, is going to have a pile of information to give you, and there might be 10 other parties that are going to have piles of information to give you, but that determination has to be made at some point.
All right, so but we're going to have this meeting prior, separate and apart from the board
Separate and
meetings.
apart.
Outstanding.
Does it have to be after 5 o'clock?
I don't believe so.
No, ma'am.
I do not.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Davis, let me just raise one issue. The 28th, we have a 10-day publication requirement. We're already the 14th. It's going to be very tight to get that in for 10 days' notice. We'll have to get that in the paper pretty quick. I don't know whether we're going to be able to make that.
Not going to make it, are we? Paper goes out today.
Well, let me put it to you this way. We need to do this within this time period. So what I'm going to suggest is if we don't make the Definiac Herald, let's go ahead and get it to the Daily News. It's a paper of general circulation, and we can do that tomorrow. We can start that application tomorrow or the next day.
Okay.
That will solve that problem. Do y'all, and I'm going to leave that to you guys, do you want to go ahead and schedule the date for the compliance hearing tonight? I would
Yeah.
like to get that going, and so.
I think for everybody's sake, we need to, do we need to do that before the 28th?
You can. It would be better if you could, but if you can't find a date, then.
I'm going to throw out some dates. How about the 23rd?
Will that give y'all time? Will that,
It's a Thursday. We have to,
23rd.
yeah, I'm just throwing that out, looking at my calendar. Can we do it, say, 1 o'clock in the afternoon here?
whatever
How
day
long,
y'all set
how,
on.
how long you think this will go, Mark? How long you?
Several.
Might be hours on this.
Hang on a second. I'm estimating it's going to be 6 to 8 hour here.
We need to start.
9 o'clock.
We can do it on any day you said.
Well, I thought the 24th is a good, can't do the consortiums on the 24th. Yeah, can't do this weekend.
That, I don't know that you could, we need to
Don't have
give these
time to
folks
advertise.
at least a 5-10 day notice, so.
Yeah, we don't have time to advertise.
May I approach, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, come on.
My name is Dana Matthews. I represent Sandestin Development in LLC, who is the developer at Sandestin. I've had conversation with Mr. Davis and with Mr. Stewart. It's not like we haven't been talking about some of the other issues that have nothing to do with what we were here for tonight. And we have no problem scheduling some kind of a meeting in front of the county commission that I suggest you set an entire day aside for. However, I do not think it is proper due process to be told at this meeting tonight, oh, we're going to have a quote-unquote compliance meeting. I think it would require some type of formal notice by the county that, number one, we're out of compliance, and staff has not rendered that in any of its opinions, so that we would have an opportunity to be heard and to be able to present evidence on our behalf as to any particular issues that the county has with the resort. I do not think that it is appropriate tonight just for a general comment, oh, we're going to have a compliance hearing. I mean, that's...
Let me do this. Let me do this. In fact, I was trying to probably do too much procedural due process here. I knew these folks were going to be here. I knew we were going to talk about we had the E2 change on the agenda. I felt it was an appropriate time to give them notice that we're going to schedule that hearing. And I'd like to get a date. The staff is going to give on the issues in a formal notice between now and the hearing, whatever date that is. I thought that was plenty of notice to everybody, including the applicant and any objectors. So that was, I certainly don't want to step on anybody's procedural due process rights, and I think that gives you guys an opportunity to see what the notice is, and then when it's given to you, then you'll be ready to go for the hearing.
Well,
And you know,
and
and we know, there's no big mystery about what the issues are going to be.
Well, there's also, you've got a number of consultants on both sides that coordinate schedules as well, and we are committed to working with the county expeditiously to set a hearing at the appropriate time. But number one, we have to be put on notice in writing as to what the issues are and have a reasonable period of time in which to prepare to present our side to the commission. And with all due respect, I do not think between now and the 28th that that's going to occur. I mean, yeah, now, I'll be glad to work with Dee Dee tomorrow in terms of setting a date, and with Mr. Vorbeck.
Monday, February 3rd.
That works.
And do we want to move the E2 change as well, or just?
Mr. Vorbeck, come forward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I guess the problem, and what Mark's wrestling is that you want to have the public hearing on the E2 change on the 28th, 2 weeks from today, but this needs to be heard at that meeting, if not before. So I think it's an issue that you're going to have a public hearing to adopt this ordinance, and the issues that says whether they're in compliance or not in compliance is going to come out at that meeting. And so I think you're getting the cart before the horse is if you have a adoption hearing for the E2 change before you hear the compliance issues. Because what the statute says, you cannot issue any development permits, development approvals, or even give assistance, basically, if they're out of compliance with their development order.
Maybe I misunderstood, but I thought the E2 change was just like trying to correct us, if you call it a Scribner's error. or, you know, and then, okay.
Let me, this is a fine line, and let me, and Greg, I'll use your expertise as well. Yes, Commissioner, you're right. The E2 change travels separately than the compliance to this extent. We could grant the E2 change, but until we have a determination on compliance, yea or nay, Mr. Vorbeck is then correct that we couldn't issue any development orders or permits if we find them in non-compliance.
Yeah.
The E2 change does not give Mr. Matthews' client permission to build Osprey Point, which is what he plans on building there. But it's the next step for him to do that. If you grant the E2 change and then a week later you have a non-compliance finding, there's not going to be any building permits issued or any development order issued, because we are then prohibited by law from doing that. On the flip side of that, if you find he is in compliance and there's an affirmative vote by the board in that direction, then they're in a position where the E2 change is passed and they keep going down the steps of getting development orders, okay? So yes, Mr. Vorbeck is correct to the extent that there's going to be a compliance hearing, but that doesn't mean the E2 change is not necessarily tied to a compliance hearing.
Well, the problem, the only thing I disagree with Mark on is the staff has gone through the TRC and approved this project, subject to this coming in front of this board and getting an E2 change. They, I'm sure, fully intend to grant. It's a minor permit that they're granting on this, which we obviously disagree with. But they could issue this permit. Our key is, Mark's absolutely right. The E2 change itself is a minor issue, but it's the only opportunity that the SOA and the many homeowners associations has had a chance to appear in front of this board to prove and show these non-compliance issues, and basically in the history of the development, because the SOA has only been run by the homeowners or controlled by the homeowners for a few years. And so it's very important, and it's the only opportunity. And I would just hate the E2 change to happen without the compliance hearing taking place. Now, it would be okay to have open the hearing up and then continue it. I'm not going to have any procedural issues about that, but I don't think the E2 hearing should be closed until you have all the substantial compliance information, and then you all make a determination.
Mr. Stewart, can you give us your assessment, please?
I think that the E2 change is a corrective type of device. And frankly, with the developer for months, we have been trying to encourage the developer to clean up many of the problems in the past. This is one of those steps. I think what Mr. Vorbeck is saying is that there is no reason why we cannot hear the amendment with the E2 at the same time as the compliance. We could notice for the same hearing. So you would only have to hear everything in terms of Sandestin and the history one time, but the E2 is really separate from that. That really is separate. Because you could approve the E2, correct the Scribner's error, and then ultimately find that they aren't in compliance and not go forward.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Okay.
So what I would suggest then, given that advice, is we can set the E2 change and the compliance hearing on the same date, which would be whatever date y'all can set.
Ms. Meadows suggested February the 3rd, or do we have to do it on a regular board day?
No.
Okay.
You can set it
February
anytime.
3rd? I'm okay with that.
Monday, February 3rd.
February 3rd at 9 o'clock in the morning down here?
That'd be fine. And we will advertise for the E2 ordinance to also be heard at that special meeting.
Okay.
Is that,
Is that what
it's on Monday?
Monday.
Is that okay with you, you attorney types? Yeah, you'll have a whole weekend, you know.
Mr. Matthews?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. What I would request is, and by the consent of the developer, is that have the E2 change, which is a Scribner's error, and there should be no opposition to it on the 28th, like we're talking about, schedule and we will agree that there will be no DO issued until you have a quote-unquote compliance, assuming we get something from staff so we know exactly what it is, and then we will schedule something, and whether it be the February 3rd or sometime thereafter, We need to be able to check with out-of-town consultants to be able to coordinate a time, because I have a feeling this is not going to be an hour or 2-hour meeting on this issue.
Never has been.
I know, and it's unfair to y'all or to anybody else to try to break it up into several pieces. So I would ask, I mean, the E2 is simple. Staff's not going to give us a development order until we have a hearing on whatever these compliance
Dana,
issues.
if I've heard you right, just make sure I have the E2 hearing on the 28th. Agree there will be no DOs issued until we have that February 3rd or whatever date hearing on compliance.
Yeah, but let's get it coordinated sometime within the next 45 days and get something out of staff.
We're going to go ahead and set it for the 3rd, but if something happens and you need a continuance, that's fine. But we will
Okay.
agree that in the meantime or until that compliance hearing's had, there would be no DO order.
How long would the hearing take on the 28th?
5 minutes. I mean, it's
Really?
a fairly
Okay.
simple.
I'm going to find out.
Is that
How long
5
that
minutes? Because,
Yes.
okay.
We need to know if we're going to schedule it for the 3rd, and assuming we get everybody lined up to do that when will we get the report to tell us what we have to address? Because we've had issues before. We don't want to be jammed up until like January 30th or something, or the 28th. I mean, is it going to be in the next week or?
No later than Friday.
I think that we have previously submitted where our position is on the various issues. And certainly we've been talking for probably 9 months. This isn't new. So I think those issues have been put out, and they were in a staff summary that was submitted and a part of the agenda.
Why don't we do this then? We send Mr. Matthews and Mr. Vorbeck a letter saying, here are the issues that we will consider on the 3rd.
Would that be something, excuse me, will this be something separate and apart from the documents that I show here as Exhibit 2, where outstanding issues?
That's what I want to ask. Is this the issue that we're going to be talking about? Exhibit 2 to Renee's January 14th, 2014 staff report?
Those are the issues.
Okay. I don't need anything else other than tell us that if you're telling we're in non-compliance, we're going to address these issues. I just get a short little letter to that effect, and then I know this is what we're talking about.
Yes, the SOA, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
The SOA has, we don't know if the staff has the same issues that the SOA does or not. The SOA is as I'm sure aware, we've hired a planner and Wendy Gray to study these, and we've come up with a list of right now 4 issues that we want to bring to you that show noncompliance. And now I don't have any problem giving those 4 issues to Mark to put on notification. They know the issues that we want. There's many issues that the SOA has with this development, but in this specific circumstance where we're talking about substantial noncompliance, there's particularly 4 issues that we want to bring attention to this board and provide evidence on. So as long as our issues are addressed too, then that'd be fine. I don't have any problem with that.
And just out of fundamental fairness to both sides, do you agree that you'll provide whatever those are to Mr. Dice and have him provide those to Dana by Friday? That way he'll be prepared to address those. I think.
Yeah, I'll get them to Dana. Dana already knows. He's got the letter. They were addressed in a letter that I sent to both of you. Those were the issues, and that'll be fine. I have no problem with that.
Why don't we collect them all then, one letter to both sides, and publish that, and we'll publish that as simply as the notice of the hearing.
Okay. So the question was, what I wanted to address earlier, Mr. Chairman, is having the public hearing. As long as the ordinance is not adopted, you have a public hearing, and as long as I don't care if we have the public hearing, because these issues we thought we were going to present them at the public hearing. If you want to bifurcate it and have 2, that's fine with us, but the issue, we just want our chance to appear in front of this board and argue our points, and bring the evidence forward. But what I'm trying to say is, let's make sure. I'm just worried about getting lost in the wash here, and this thing gets adopted, and staff issues a development order, and we got a problem.
Mr. Matthews, as I understood it, on behalf of his client, Sandestin Development, has just stipulated to allowing us to go forward with the adoption hearing on the 28th on the E2 change. If it's adopted, that we would have no development orders issued at Sandestin until this compliance thing is complete, A or nay.
Okay, and if we're down the line, if it takes 2 months, huh?
Yeah, but now, listen, I want to be clear about one thing. We're going to set it for February 3rd, but if you want to continue this, you better have a heck of a reason. You know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'll be ready February 3rd.
Okay, now are we going forward on the 28th or not?
Yes.
Because I'm confused.
No,
Okay.
we're going to, let me say it a third time, make sure we're all clear.
Yes, please.
We're going to go forward with the E2 change on the 28th. We're going to advertise it like a statute, like we're supposed to.
Okay.
We will consider it on the 28th, yea or nay. Then on the 3rd, tentatively, or we're setting it tonight. We're going to have a hearing on the compliance or non-compliance issues as raised by Renee's report and Mr. Vorbeck's letter, and we're going to compile that into one letter sent to both parties and published as the notice of that hearing.
And when we say no development order will be issued, none on Osprey Point, because that's where the E2 comes from, and that's what the issue is about.
Are there any others pending right
No, there's none other pending that I'm aware of, so I can't imagine anything happening between now and then, but that's the issue.
Yeah,
Let's be specific.
I don't mind if there's nothing else pending, but, you know, the statute says there should be no development orders issued.
And that won't get lost in the wash.
Okay.
Thank you both.
Anything else from staff?
No, sir.
Is that it?
Yes, sir.
Stand adjourned.
Need to take action on 7C?
Oh, yeah.
Hang on a minute.
We do need a
Adjourn.
motion and a second and
So moved.
a hearing to have that hearing.
Sandy, second.
Second.
We have motion and second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
Just,
Oh, thank you.